Anthony leaned against the porch railing, watching the evening settle in. There was a strange quiet in the air, a calm that didn't sit right with him. Lately, things with Rachel had been off, distant. Tonight, she was heading out for a girls' night, but something about it nagged at him. The door creaked open, and Rachel stepped out, her heels clicking against the wooden floor. Anthony's eyes widened. She wore a short, tight dress, unlike anything she normally chose. Her makeup was striking, more suited for a night out at a club than a casual evening with friends. "Rachel," he said, keeping his voice steady, "you really need to wear that? It seems a bit much for a night out with the girls." Rachel rolled her eyes, her tone dismissive. "It's just a dress, Anthony. Don't overthink it. I'll be back before you know it." He frowned, feeling a twinge of frustration. "I don't think it's appropriate. What if something happens?" She turned to face him, eyes flashing with irritation. "I can take care of myself, Anthony. I don't need you hovering over me." Before he could say another word, she was already heading down the steps, her head held high. Watching her walk toward the car, a knot of worry twisted tighter in his gut. He followed her, trying one last time to reach out. "Rachel, wait. I'm not trying to control you. I'm just worried. Can we talk about this?" Rachel spun around, exasperation etched on her face. "Talk about what, Anthony? You don't trust me, do you?" "It's not about trust," he said, shaking his head. "It's about respect, about concern. Things between us feel different, and I don't know why." Her laugh was cold, a sound that sent a shiver through him. "Maybe I am different. Maybe I'm done playing the role of the perfect wife." His heart sank, her words hitting harder than he'd expected. "Is that really how you feel?" For a moment, something soft flickered in her gaze, but it vanished as quickly as it came. "I'm going out. We can talk later." She got into the car, slammed the door, and drove off without looking back. Anthony stood in the driveway, staring at the taillights as they faded into the distance. A sense of helplessness washed over him. He walked back to the porch, the warm summer air doing nothing to ease the growing tension in his chest. Sitting on the steps, he tried to pinpoint when things had started to unravel. Rachel hadn't always been like this. There was a time when they laughed together, dreamed together. Now, there was only silence where their conversations used to be. He pulled out his phone, scrolling through old photos. One caught his eye. Rachel, smiling on the beach, her face lit up with happiness. It felt like another life. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Anthony decided to call his friend David. Maybe some company would help. "Hey David, are you free?" he asked when his friend picked up. "Yeah, man. What's going on?" "Rachel's out with her friends, and I could use someone to talk to." David agreed to come over, and soon they were sitting on the porch, beers in hand. David cracked jokes, shared stories, but Anthony's mind was elsewhere. His thoughts kept drifting back to Rachel, to the way she'd changed. "You think I'm overreacting?" Anthony finally asked. David shook his head. "You're just worried about your marriage, man. Nothing wrong with that. Maybe just wait until she's in a better mood to talk." Anthony nodded, though he wasn't sure if that would help. The uneasy feeling in his gut hadn't gone away. As the night wore on, David eventually left, and Anthony found himself alone again, the house eerily quiet. He checked his phone, hoping for a message from Rachel. There was nothing. Hours passed, and the stillness in the house grew oppressive. He tried reading, tried watching TV, but his mind wouldn't settle. It was well past midnight when he heard a car pull into the driveway. His heart raced as he moved to the window. What he saw made his blood run cold. Rachel stumbled out of the car, her arm wrapped around a stranger. The man's hands gripped her waist, holding her close. They laughed together, their whispers lost in the night, completely unaware of the world around them, or of the man watching from the window. Rachel and the stranger made their way toward the front door, their laughter cutting through the stillness of the night like nails on a chalkboard. Anthony stood in the hallway, his pulse pounding in his ears. The door swung open, and the stench of alcohol filled the air. His eyes immediately locked on the bruised marks trailing down Rachel's neck, reminders of someone else's hands. His fists clenched without thinking. "What the hell is this, Rachel?" His voice wavered, a mix of fury and disbelief. Rachel shot him a look that was half defiant, half disdainful. "Don't start, Anthony. I told you I'm my own woman. I can do what I want, and if you try to stop me, my lover here will take care of you." The stranger smirked, his eyes dancing with a silent dare. "Yeah, man. Best you back off. In that instant, something snapped inside Anthony. He crossed the room in a flash, his hand coming down hard across Rachel's cheek. The sharp crack of the slap echoed through the house, followed by a stunned silence. Rachel staggered back, her hand instinctively covering her face, eyes wide in disbelief. "You bastard!" she screamed, stumbling, her voice a cocktail of shock and rage. The stranger lunged at Anthony, but Anthony was quicker. He shoved the man back, keeping his voice level, cold. "Get the hell out of my house." The guy hesitated, his eyes flicking toward Rachel for some kind of signal, but she had crumpled into a sobbing mess, mascara streaking down her cheeks. Realizing he was outmatched, the stranger sneered before slamming the door on his way out. "You haven't seen the last of me," he muttered. Anthony turned to Rachel, her sobs filling the hallway like a sad soundtrack. "How could you, Rachel? How could you bring him here?" Rachel's sorrow quickly morphed back into anger. "You never listen to me. You always act like you know what's best. I'm sick of you treating me like some child. This is your idea of freedom? Cheating on me and parading him through our house?" His voice cracked, a hint of hurt threading through the anger. She wiped at her face, smearing the makeup further, her expression hardening. "Maybe it is. Maybe I needed to shake things up for you to notice how unhappy I've been." Anthony stared at her, the betrayal sinking deeper into his bones. "So it's my fault now? You're justifying this? Blaming me?" Rachel let out a frustrated sigh. "It's not about blame, Anthony. It's about the fact that this marriage is over. I'm done." Her words landed like a heavy blow. He felt a wave of sadness wash over him, knowing there was nothing left to say. "If that's how you feel, then we're done." Rachel's shoulders slumped, the fight draining out of her. "I'll pack my things in the morning." "Do whatever you need to," Anthony said, his voice quiet. "But know that you've destroyed everything we had." Turning away, he retreated to the kitchen, needing space to think, to breathe. He poured a glass of water, staring blankly at the liquid as if it held some answer. But the cold sip did little to ease the turmoil inside him. From the hallway, Rachel's quiet sobs floated toward him, but he felt nothing now, only a hollow emptiness. This was it, the end of their life together. The weight of it all hit him like a punch to the gut. He had loved her, deeply, but all that remained now was a raw chasm of betrayal and shattered trust. For the next few days, Anthony moved through life in a daze. Rachel's betrayal ate away at him like a slow poison, turning his sadness into a bitter resolve. He couldn't let her get away with this. Not like that. On the third morning, Anthony sat at the kitchen table, his laptop open in front of him. The house was too quiet, each sound amplified, the hum of the fridge, the distant chirping of birds. He scrolled through Rachel's social media, scanning her recent posts, looking for clues. His phone buzzed. It was a message from David. "How are you holding up?" David asked. Anthony typed back quickly. "I've been better. I need your help. Can you come over?" An hour later, David stood at the door, taking one look at his friend and realizing this wasn't a casual catch-up. "What's going on, man?" Anthony laid it all out, bitterness seeping into his words. "I need proof. I need to gather evidence of what Rachel's been up to. Can you help me?" David nodded without hesitation. "Of course. What do you need?" Anthony pulled out a small notepad filled with scribbles of ideas. "First, I've got a tracker on her car. She still thinks I'm clueless, so that's in our favor. I need help monitoring it." David raised his eyebrows. "You've really thought this through, haven't you?" Anthony's gaze hardened as he stared at the pile of evidence. "I need to do this. She tore everything apart. I need to know exactly what I'm dealing with." The following days blurred into a steady covert operation. Anthony and David alternated shifts, tracking Rachel's every move, capturing her secret meetups with Adam. Anthony even went so far as to plant a hidden camera in her car and slip a microphone into her purse. Each night he combed through the recordings, every whispered word adding another crack in the foundation of his self-control. One evening, while reviewing the latest audio, something caught his ear. Rachel's voice, low and anxious, filtered through the speaker. "I can't keep doing this, Adam. It's getting dangerous. Anthony's becoming different. I'm scared." Adam's laughter echoed through the recording. "He's clueless, babe. Don't worry about him. If things get messy, I'll take care of it." Anthony's grip tightened around the edge of his desk, knuckles white, but he forced himself to stay calm. Carefully, he saved the file, another piece of evidence for the growing folder on his desktop. A week later, Anthony sat with David in his living room. The table between them was piled high with incriminating photos, voice recordings, and detailed logs. "I think we've got more than enough," Anthony said, his tone eerily calm. David glanced at the mountain of evidence, then looked at his friend. "So what's the plan now?" Anthony leaned forward, his eyes cold. "I'm confronting her first. She can't talk her way out of this. After that, I'm filing for divorce. But I'm not letting her off that easy. I'll make sure everyone knows what she's done." David sighed, leaning back. "You sure about this? Once you pull that trigger, there's no going back." Anthony nodded, jaw clenched. "I'm sure. She betrayed me, David. There's no coming back from that." That evening, Anthony waited, the house heavy with a tense quiet. Every tick of the clock seemed louder, each passing second stretching his nerves taut. He had imagined this moment over and over, and now it was here. When Rachel finally walked through the door, the look on her face immediately shifted from relaxed to wary. Anthony stood in the middle of the living room, an envelope held tightly in his hand. "Rachel," he said, his voice cutting through the air, "we need to talk." She rolled her eyes and tossed her purse onto the couch, her irritation barely concealed. "What now, Anthony? More of your paranoia?" "No, no more accusations." He stepped forward and handed her the envelope. "Just the truth. Divorce papers. I'm done." Rachel blinked, the color draining from her face as she fumbled to open the envelope. "You're serious?" "As a heart attack," Anthony replied, his tone flat. "I've got the proof. Don't bother denying it. It'll all go to court if you refuse to sign." Her facade cracked in an instant. The confidence and defiance that had propped her up collapsed, and she burst into tears, shaking her head. "Anthony, no. We can work this out. It was a mistake. I wasn't thinking clearly." "A mistake?" Anthony's voice edged with disbelief. "You've been living a lie for months, Rachel. This wasn't a moment of weakness. It was premeditated. You broke us." Rachel collapsed onto the floor, tears streaming down her face. "Please don't do this. I love you." Anthony's anger flared. "Love?" His hand shot out, throwing a stack of photos at her feet. "Is this your version of love? Sneaking around, lying to my face?" Rachel's sobs grew more desperate. "I didn't know what I was doing. I was confused, lost." Anthony's tone turned cold, almost robotic. "No, Rachel. You knew exactly what you were doing. You made your bed, now you're going to lie in it." She crawled closer, her hands reaching for him, fingers trembling. "I can't lose you, Anthony. Please. I'll do anything. I'll go to therapy. We'll fix this together. Just don't leave me." Anthony stepped back, his expression unreadable. "Too late. I gave you every chance, and you threw them away." Rachel's desperation clung to her, the reality finally sinking in. "Please, one more chance. I can change. I'll do whatever it takes." For a brief moment, Anthony's face softened, but the memory of everything she had done swept over him again, hardening his resolve. "It's not just about this affair, Rachel. It's about who you are. Someone who could betray me like this. I don't want that kind of person in my life anymore." Rachel sat frozen, the weight of his words hitting like a sledgehammer. Her sobs quieted as she realized there was no more fight to be had. "What am I supposed to do now?" she whispered, defeated. Anthony's voice was steady, almost calm. "You sign the papers. We go our separate ways. You'll figure out who you are, but it won't be with me. Maybe one day you'll come to terms with what you've done." With shaky hands, Rachel reached for the pen, each signature feeling like another piece of their life together crumbling into dust. When she finished, she handed the papers back to Anthony, her eyes hollow, empty. Anthony took them, his face impassive. "I'll file these tomorrow. You should start packing." Rachel stood, legs unsteady beneath her. "Anthony, I'm sorry. For everything." He looked at her, and for a second, there was a flicker of something. Maybe pity, but it vanished. "I know, Rachel, but sorry doesn't fix this." Without another word, she retreated to the bedroom, and Anthony collapsed onto the couch. The weight of the past few weeks finally crashed down on him. He had done what needed to be done, but that didn't dull the ache of betrayal. The house was silent again, but it didn't feel oppressive anymore. For the first time in weeks, the quiet felt peaceful. He leaned back, closed his eyes, and let out a long breath. the worst was over. Now came the hard part, putting his life back together, piece by piece. The days after the divorce were a fog for Anthony. He was slowly trying to rebuild his life, though the relief of escaping the chaos of his marriage was undeniable. Still, a quiet sadness lingered in the background, and in those moments of solitude, he often wondered if he would ever truly move forward. On the other hand, Rachel was crumbling. She couldn't handle the rejection. The reality of losing Anthony, mixed with the burden of her own guilt, dragged her into a downward spiral. She stopped showing up at work and began spending her days drowning in alcohol, wrapped in self-pity. Friends distanced themselves, unsure of how to help, leaving her to sink deeper into her isolation. One evening, Anthony was relaxing at home, a book in hand, when a sudden, frantic pounding on the door startled him. His heart sank. He didn't have to guess who it was. "You destroyed my life." Rachel's voice slurred from the other side, filled with rage and bitterness. She kept pounding on the door, fists leaving dents on the wooden surface. Anthony hesitated for a moment, then opened the door cautiously. His face remained calm, though his eyes betrayed concern. "Rachel, you shouldn't be here." She ignored him, her eyes wild, her makeup streaked with tears and frustration. "I loved you, Anthony. I gave you everything, and you just threw me away like I was nothing." Anthony took a deep breath, keeping his voice even. "You're drunk, Rachel. Go home. Sleep it off." But she didn't back down. Instead, she lunged at him, her hands reaching for his face in desperation. Anthony instinctively pushed her away, careful but firm. She stumbled backward, her balance lost, and in a horrible instant, she fell. The back of her head struck the corner of the coffee table with a sickening crack. "Rachel!" Anthony yelled, rushing to her side. Blood began to trickle from a cut on her forehead, and her body was limp. Panic surged through him as he scrambled for his phone, dialing 911 with trembling hands. 911, what's your emergency?" The calmness in the operator's voice contrasted sharply with his frantic tone. "My ex-wife fell. She hit her head. She's bleeding. Please, send help." Anthony's words tumbled out in a panic. The operator guided him through the steps, telling him how to check her breathing and stop the bleeding. The minutes stretched out painfully as Anthony knelt beside her, waiting for the paramedics. Finally, the sound of sirens broke the silence. The paramedics arrived, moving swiftly and efficiently. Anthony stepped aside, helpless as they assessed her condition and transferred her onto a stretcher. He watched, numb, as they wheeled her out the door. Without thinking, he grabbed his keys and followed them to the hospital, his mind spinning with guilt and fear. At the hospital, Anthony sat in the waiting room, head buried in his hands. The cold, sterile environment did nothing to calm his racing thoughts. Time dragged on until a doctor finally approached. "Are you Anthony?" the doctor asked, pulling him from his daze. Anthony stood, his heart pounding in his chest. "Yes, that's me. How is she?" The doctor nodded, his tone reassuring. "She's stable. She has a concussion and a pretty deep cut, but nothing life-threatening. We're keeping her for observation overnight." Anthony let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "Can I see her?" The doctor led him to her room. Rachel lay in the hospital bed, pale and bandaged, looking small and fragile. Her eyelids fluttered, and she opened her eyes when she sensed his presence. "Anthony," she murmured, her voice soft and weak. "I'm here, Rachel," he said quietly, sitting down by her bed. "Just rest." Tears welled in her eyes. "I'm so sorry, Anthony, for everything." Anthony's heart clenched. Despite everything, he still cared. "I know. Just focus on healing, Rachel." In the days following Rachel's discharge from the hospital, the weight of the accident pressed heavily on her. Her lover, learning about the incident, disappeared without a trace, leaving her more isolated than ever. It was a painful blow, but also a turning point. Rachel decided to seek therapy, determined to rebuild the shattered pieces of her life. Meanwhile, Anthony was on his own path of healing, slowly moving forward. Their contact became infrequent, limited to occasional check-ins, as both struggled to carve out new identities post-divorce. Though their marriage had ended, the bond they once shared remained, a complicated mix of love, betrayal, and ultimately, growth. Over time, Anthony came to realize that healing wasn't a destination, but an ongoing journey. Both he and Rachel walked separate paths, but carried the lessons of their shared history, determined to create better futures for themselves. As the months passed, Anthony began to reclaim his life. The memory of Rachel's betrayal still lingered, but he refused to let it control him. He threw himself into his career, taking on new challenges and earning the respect of his colleagues. The busy rhythm of work gave him a sense of purpose, something to focus on beyond the pain. One bright Saturday morning, Anthony decided to explore the local farmers market. Cooking had recently become a hobby for him, a creative outlet that brought calm and joy. As he wandered through the stalls, he admired the vibrant selection of fresh fruits, vegetables, and handmade goods. "Care for a taste, sir?" an older vendor asked, holding out a piece of warm apple pie. Anthony smiled as he took a bite. "This is delicious. I'll take 2, please." As the seasons changed, so did Anthony's life. He began expanding his social circle, reconnecting with friends and meeting new people. One evening, he found himself in a cozy wine bar, laughing with a group of friends. Among them was Megan, a sharp and witty woman who had recently moved to town. They clicked instantly, sharing an easy conversation that flowed from books to nature. "Have you read the latest Stephen King novel?" Megan asked, her eyes sparkling with excitement. Anthony grinned. "I have. What did you think?" They spent hours talking, their connection deepening as the night wore on. For the first time in what felt like forever, Anthony felt a spark of something new, a sign that perhaps he was truly moving on. While Anthony was finding his footing, Rachel continued to struggle. The divorce had left her with nothing, and the fallout from her actions left her reputation in ruins. Desperate for a fresh start, she moved to a new town, hoping to escape her past. But no matter where she went, the weight of guilt and regret followed her. One afternoon, while sitting alone in her sparsely furnished apartment, Rachel received an unexpected call from Jessica, an old friend. "Rachel, I heard what happened. Are you okay?" Jessica's voice was soft, filled with concern. Tears welled up in Rachel's eyes as she sighed. "I'm trying, Jessica, but it's hard. I made such a mess of everything." Jessica's voice remained gentle. "We all make mistakes, Rachel. What matters is how you move forward. Have you considered talking to someone about it? A therapist, maybe?" Rachel nodded, though Jessica couldn't see her. "I've thought about it. Maybe it's time I did." And so, the following week, Rachel started therapy. The sessions were tough, forcing her to face her mistakes and the pain she had caused. But they also provided a path forward, giving her a chance to understand herself and find a measure of peace. Back in his own world, Anthony continued to thrive. He had built a supportive group of friends and found joy in the little things, like cooking, reading, and spending time outdoors. His relationship with Megan blossomed, based on mutual respect and understanding. One evening, as Anthony and Megan strolled hand in hand along the beach, she turned to him, her face glowing in the setting sun. "Anthony, you've come so far. I'm proud of you." Anthony looked at her, gratitude filling his heart. "Thank you, Megan. I wouldn't have made it without the support of people like you." As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Anthony felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in a long time. The scars of the past were still there, but they no longer defined him. He had taken calculated revenge on the wife who had betrayed him, unraveling her lover's arrogance in the process. But more than that, he had rebuilt his life on his terms, stronger and wiser. Standing on the porch of his new home, Anthony watched the sunset. The colors spread across the sky, casting a warm glow over the horizon. As he sipped his coffee, he reflected on the lessons he had learned over the past year. The whirlwind of emotions had tested him, but in the end, he had emerged stronger, with a newfound sense of purpose and the promise of a brighter future ahead. The door creaked open behind Anthony, and Megan stepped out, wrapping her arms around his waist from behind. Her embrace was gentle, a steadying presence that he had come to treasure. "What's on your mind?" she asked softly, her voice wrapping around him with the same warmth as her arms. Anthony took a deep breath, letting the crisp evening air fill his lungs. "Just thinking about everything," he said, a faint smile playing on his lips. "It's been quite the journey." Megan rested her head on his shoulder, her cheek pressing lightly against his back. "You've been through so much, but you've handled it all with such strength. I'm really lucky to have you in my life." Anthony turned to face her, his heart swelling with appreciation. No, I'm the lucky one. You've been here for me when I needed it the most. Her eyes sparkled, and she smiled, a warmth in her expression. We make a good team, don't we? He chuckled, nodding. Yeah, we do. A really good one. They stood there together, silent but comfortable, watching as the sun dipped below the horizon, leaving a trail of soft colors in the sky. For the first time in what felt like forever, Anthony felt at peace, like he was finally moving forward into a brighter chapter of his life. Later, they went inside to prepare dinner. The kitchen filled with the smell of roasting vegetables and baked chicken, a comforting aroma that mirrored the sense of harmony between them. They moved around each other effortlessly, each one knowing what the other needed without a word. Can you grab the rosemary for me? Megan asked, stirring a pot on the stove. Anthony reached for the herb and handed it to her with a grin. Here you go. Thanks, she replied, sprinkling it into the dish. It's coming together perfectly. Anthony smiled, enjoying the simple pleasure of cooking together. It had become their thing, a way to unwind, connect, and share something they both loved. As they sat down to eat, Anthony looked around the room. The walls were lined with photographs from their adventures, hiking trips, beach outings, and cozy nights at home. Each picture was a reminder of how far he had come and the new life they were creating together. To new beginnings, Anthony said, lifting his glass. Megan raised hers with a smile. To new beginnings. After dinner, they settled on the couch with a bottle of wine, the conversation flowing naturally as they shared stories, dreams, and plans for the future. I've been thinking, Megan said, her eyes lighting up. Maybe we should take a trip, just the two of us, somewhere new. Anthony leaned in, intrigued. That sounds like a great idea. Where do you want to go? I've always wanted to see the Pacific Northwest, she said, excitement in her voice. The forests, the coastline, it all seems so beautiful and wild. Anthony smiled, already picturing it. Let's make it happen. I'd love that. Megan leaned over, kissing him gently. It'll be an adventure. The thought of exploring new places with Megan filled Anthony with anticipation. It felt like a fresh start, so different from the emptiness and loss he'd felt after his divorce. Later that night, they snuggled on the couch, watching a movie and simply enjoying each other's company. Anthony couldn't help but reflect on how much had changed in his life. The wounds of the past were still there, but they no longer dominated his thoughts. Instead, they had shaped him, made him more resilient, more grounded. Before bed, Anthony stepped out onto the porch one last time. The night sky was clear, stars twinkling brightly overhead. He took a deep breath, feeling the cool air on his skin and letting the calm of the moment sink in. The vastness of the sky reminded him that there were endless possibilities ahead, and for the first time in a long time, he felt excited about what was to come. Megan joined him outside, her hand slipping easily into his. Ready for bed? She asked softly, her eyes full of warmth. Anthony nodded, looking at her with love and gratitude. Yeah, I'm ready. As they walked back inside together, Anthony knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter. With Megan by his side, he felt ready to embrace whatever the future held, knowing that together they could face anything. The future no longer seemed uncertain, but full of hope and endless possibilities.